Morning.
Good morning, Director Schneer. Good morning, Director Young.
Good morning. I'm just trying to get my earpiece in. Sorry. Change here. Okay.
Hey, Robert.
Yeah.
Just so you know, it appears Mr. Benapal has joined us, but is having trouble connecting to audio.
Okay.
What is Matt doing? What is Matt doing? No time. Okay.
Now, what is Matt doing without a tie?
I feel so naked. Good morning, everybody.
I would like to make a quick announcement. If you are a board member participating as an attendee and calling on your phone, if you could please hit *9 to indicate, and I can transfer you over as a panelist.
And Jessica, are you monitoring for a quorum?
I am.
Okay. Are we there yet?
Give me one moment. I don't think we are quite yet.
Okay, thank you.
Chair Cabalden, we do have a quorum now.
Right. All right, then why don't we begin and call the May 7th meeting, remote meeting of the Transportation Committee to order. We are meeting pursuant to the Governor's Executive Order authorizing the committee and staff to meet via teleconference. And so let's begin with the roll call. All right, Jessica, you're on mute. You're still on mute. Sorry.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
Before I call roll, I'd like to make a few announcements. First, this meeting is being recorded. Second, I'd like to thank Robert Tadevich, who will be providing us with tech support. So you may hear him make some technical announcements throughout the meeting. Third, for members of the public that are participating in this meeting and wish to make a public comment, you may do so in a couple ways. If you are participating telephonically, you can press *9 to indicate a desire to make a comment, and I will notify the chair and pull you into the meeting when it's your turn. If you are participating by computer or smart device, tap your name in the attendee list, then tap raise hand, and I will notify the chair and pull you into the meeting when it's your turn. Or you may use the chat feature to make a comment and I will read it for you. With all options, please remember to state your full name, limit verbal comment to no more than 3 minutes, and limit written comment to 250 words. We also have provided the option for members of the public to email their comments in advance. So I will be sharing those comments when it's time. I do have a few already. I will also be monitoring my email throughout the meeting and will read those comments when it is time. And lastly, committee members who are just now joining us, if you wish to speak on an item, you may use the raise hand or chat feature or press *9 to alert the chair that you'd like to speak. But please feel free to alert us verbally if we overlook your notification. That concludes my announcement. So let's move to roll call. Members of the committee, please say present when I call your name. Director Harris?
Present.
Thank you. Director Joyner?
Here.
Director Peters?
Here.
Thank you. Director Samayoa?
Here.
Director Sander?
Here.
Director Saylor? I'll mark him as absent. Director Chenier?
Here.
Thank you. Director Slowey?
Here.
Thank you. Director Bierkamp?
Present.
Vice Chair Jennings?
Present.
Vice Chair Soon?
Here.
Chair Cabaldon?
Here.
And do we have ex officio member Benapal here today?
Good morning. I'm here.
Okay, good morning.
All right, so quorum is present. So I think our first item is public communications. Have we received any communication, or is there anyone in queue to address the committee, Ms. Lee?
I am checking right now. Give me one moment. It appears no one has raised their hand, so we're clear.
All right, then we're going to recess as the SAGOG Transportation Committee and reconvene as the Capital Valley Regional Authority for Freeways and Expressways, which has a separate agenda. And so we'll dispense with the roll call. And are there public communications on this item, Ms. Lee?
I have not received any, and I'm going to check our attendees. Just give me one moment. I don't see any. I don't see anyone who'd like to give public comment.
All right, then we have first the consent agenda, which is just item 1. Is there any?
Director Slowey moves the consent.
I'll second. Chenier.
All right, and I'll also welcome Member Young as well.
Thank you. I was just going to chime in that I'm here.
Yes, welcome. Thank you for joining us. This is a bit easier format to get to than our in-person meeting. So thank you for being with us. All right, so we have a motion and a second on the consent agenda, which is simply item 1. There's no question or discussion. Then, Madam Clerk, we need a roll call, correct? Yes.
Yes, and I'll also let the record show that Nancy Young is present. Okay, please indicate your vote as I say your name. Director Harris?
Yes.
Director Joyner?
Yes.
Director Peters?
Yes.
Director Samayoa?
Yes.
Director Sander,
Yes.
Director Saylor, I believe, is still absent. Director Chenier,
Aye.
Director Slowey,
Yes.
motioned. Director Veerkamp,
Yes.
Director Nguyen.
Yes.
Thank you. Director Young,
Yes.
Vice Chair Jennings,
Yes.
Vice Chair Soon,
Yes.
Chair Cabaldon.
Yes. All right, so the motion on the consent agenda is adopted, and yet welcome Member Nguyen as well. Sorry, without the video, I didn't see you. So we're going to proceed to item number 2, which is the approval and release of the draft CVRSA fiscal year 2021 budget. Ms. Von Bechtel, welcome.
Good morning, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me okay. This morning we have the draft CVRSA fiscal year 2021 budget for release and public review before you today. We've developed this budget for the Capital Valley Regional Service Authority for Freeways and Expressways. And we've attached the draft in attachment A. It estimates costs for the operations and maintenance of the core call box system and for enhanced services, including freeway service patrol, the 511 StarNet system, transportation demand management, and continued implementation of the Smart Region Plan, among others. The CVRSAFE bylaws require that a budget be approved before July 1st of each fiscal year. So staff asked that the CVRSAFE committee recommends to the CVRSAFE board to approve the release of the draft fiscal year 2021 CVRSAFE budget for review and comment, with final adoption anticipated in June of 2020. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have.
All right, are there questions on the budget item? Director Young.
I'm sorry, for whatever reason, I can't find this hand on the phone. I can find it on the computer. So, okay. I know last year we talked about maybe putting some funds in there for advertisement, and I did speak with Barbara at the last meeting that we had in person to find out what was going on with that as far as being able to advertise, whether it's through the board that's on the freeway. So is there anything about that?
We've actually discussed the changeable message signs you're talking about that are on the highways and freeways around our region with Caltrans staff. Right now, they're using them for the stay-at-home order messages and the COVID-19 crisis messages. And they said they would come back and talk to us about it when this crisis is lessened, or they're no longer using them for that purpose. They're happy to actually work with us to put messages about using 511 to get roadside assistance for folks who may not know that's available to them. And we're also working with our contractor. We're finishing the call box upgrades, which also includes putting in an additional 76 signs that advertise on the side of the highway that 511 is available toll-free for roadside assistance. Those signs are going to be installed over the next 2 months. All of them will be installed prior to June 30th of this year. And I worked with our TDM staff, who we have a contractor that works on our 511 system, and they're going to be putting that up to advertise on our 511 webpage, making a priority to show folks that they can use 511 for roadside assistance. So it's clear to people, no matter how they reach us, via phone, internet, or they're driving down the highway, they're going to be able to know they can use 511 for roadside assistance.
Okay, so I thank you. I do appreciate that. So there's no extra financial cost to that?
There wouldn't be any cost to that, because those are things we already do, including the signage as well. That was part of our contract to do the call box system upgrades.
Okay, thank you. That's my
You're welcome.
And Barbara, Caltrans, if you are able to reach an arrangement with Caltrans, there's no cost involved with, they don't charge us.
No, there's no cost for that. It just has to be during times that they find that it would be appropriate for us to do it. We've talked about doing it in the fall and winter, because that's when we actually see more calls to the 511 system and usage of the call boxes for folks due to weather. That's the main thing that they believe it's used for, because of the areas the calls come from.
All right, thank you. Other questions, comments on this item? Barbara, sort of every budget we're all looking at right now, we're asking a question about the impact of the stay-at-home orders in particular. And I know for the freeway service patrol, for example, our costs are projected to be, our estimated actuals are projected to be the same as our budget. And are we experiencing, or what is our experience right now in terms of call volumes and service volumes given the reduced amount of traffic.
Yeah, there's less usage of freeway service patrol, just like you would think, because there's less people on the road, less call volumes, again, less folks out on the road needing either roadside assistance or traveler information. Those FSP contracts are already set, usually for 3 to 5 years, so the costs are going to remain the same. They're not increasing from last year, but their costs haven't gone down either because, again, they're set contracts for a set amount of service that it's still out on the road. They just aren't helping as many folks as they had been because of the reduced volume of vehicles on the highways. And we also are looking at, it's in your item as well, that we've kept the revenue from vehicle registrations flat because we don't know what it looks like in the future with vehicle registrations. That's where we receive a bulk of the revenue for this program. And we'll look at that throughout the year and may come later this year with a budget revision once we get more information from the Department of Motor Vehicles about vehicle registration and how many funds we're taking in at that point.
Right, any other question or discussion on this item? All right, then the request is that we act to approve the release of the draft budget. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
And moved by Director Young and seconded by Director Soon. Seeing no further discussion, do we have, Madam, Ms. Lee, do we have any public communications on this one?
Doesn't appear that we do.
All right, then would you please call the roll?
Certainly. Please indicate your vote when you hear your name. Director Harris?
Yes.
Thank you. Director Joyner?
Yes.
Director Peters?
Yes.
Director Samayoa?
Yes.
Director Sander?
Yes.
Director Saylor? Sorry, who's absent? Director Schneer?
Aye.
Director Slowey?
Yes.
Director Veerkamp?
Yes.
Director Nguyen?
Yes.
Ms. Young moved the motion. Vice Chair Jennings?
Yes.
Vice Chair Soon seconded. Chair Cabalden?
Yes. Would you please, could you call Director Young as well? While it is rare, it is definitely possible for one of us to make a motion and still vote against it.
Okay, absolutely. Director Young, how do you vote?
Yes.
And Vice Chair Soon, how do you vote?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Then that motion carries. So with that, we will thank Director Young and Director Nguyen for joining us this morning and adjourn the CVR Safe meeting and reconvene the Transportation Committee of SACOG. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, then that brings us to the consent item for the Transportation Committee, which is also just item 1, the minutes. Mr. Slowey, this is your specialty.
Move approval.
All right, is there a second?
Jennings will second that. Second.
All right, so it's been moved in second. Don't see any debate or discussion on this one. So Madam Clerk, would you please, do we have any public communications on the minutes?
No, not on the minutes. And I'm
All
sorry,
right.
can you confirm who motioned?
Director
Slowey.
Slowey made the motion.
Thank you, and Sanders second. Okay, please indicate your vote after you hear your name. Director Harris?
Yes.
Director Joyner?
Yes.
Director Peters?
Yes.
Director Samayoa? Director Samayoa?
Yes. Sorry.
Thank you. It's okay. Director Sander?
Yes.
Director Saylor is absent. Director Schneer?
Yes.
Director Slowey?
Yes.
Director Veerkamp?
Yes.
Vice Chair Jennings?
Yes.
Vice Chair Soon?
Yes.
Chair Cabalden?
Yes. So
Thank
that
you.
motion carries. That brings us into item 2, which is designation of Paratransit Inc. and Sacramento RT as the consolidated transportation service agencies in Sacramento County. Mr. Carpenter.
Great. Well, good morning. This item offers a staff recommendation on 2 SACOG board responsibilities. The first is the designation of a consolidated transportation service agency, or CTSA. SACOG has this responsibility in the 4-county SACOG region of Sacramento, Sutter, Yolo, and Yuba counties. And CTSAs, they coordinate community-based transit services. The second and very related responsibility is the allocation of SACOG managed funding to support CTSA activities. Now, I just want to make sure everyone knows this item only involves a recommended change in the urbanized portion of Sacramento County. There are no changes that are proposed for the rural southern portion of the county or for other counties in our region. A little bit of important background. Earlier this year, Regional Transit and Paratransit Inc. agreed to a new division of responsibilities for the services they offer in Sacramento County. Beginning at the end of next month, Sacramento Regional Transit will begin to provide ADA demand response services in-house. And this is basically the door-to-door transit services for eligible seniors and persons with disabilities unable to use fixed route bus and light rail services. Paratransit Inc. will continue to provide private contract transportation services, mobility management, and coordinated program support to a lot of community-based transit services in the county. They offer these services not only in Sacramento County, though, but other places across the country. Now, as part of the agreements made by their governing boards earlier this year, a new funding split was proposed for Paratransit Inc. and Regional Transit. The two agencies proposed to split the funding from both Measure A and what we manage, which is the Transportation Development Act, or TDA, Article 4.5, that previously went 100% to Paratransit Inc. In this new arrangement, 70% of these revenue sources will be allocated to Sacramento Regional Transit, and 30% will be allocated to Paratransit Inc. And this funding split will hopefully provide the resources to fulfill their new responsibilities. Now, in order to make them eligible for funding from SACOG, RT has formally requested that SACOG designate them, along with Paratransit Inc., as the two CTSAs for the urbanized portion of Sacramento County. And with approval of the CTSA designation, RT will then become eligible to submit claims for the specific TDA funding source that SACOG allocates for this purpose. PI, or Paratransit Inc., will also remain a CTSA and will continue to be eligible for these TDA funds. In terms of our staff analysis, staff has confirmed that RT's CTSA eligibility is there by statute. Also, RT offers numerous services and programs that really fulfill the intent of a CTSA designation. Specifically, the ADA door-to-door services that RT will start to assume, that is an eligible expense. And also, SAC-RT is already offering an increasing number of community-based kind of demand response services and providing some agency support to social service agencies. These efforts include the Smart Ride microtransit program and a long history of donating older ADA paratransit vehicles for use by these community-based social service agencies. Now, designating multiple CTSAs within the same urbanized area, it is consistent with a peer comparison of other large metros in California that have more than one CTSA in their territory. Attachment B to your staff report provides a summary of approaches elsewhere in California. At our December briefing, it was really clear that committee members expressed strong interest in this topic. Many comments were made about how important it is to provide cost-effective and innovative transportation services for what's really very much a growing population of senior and disabled persons that need special transit. Staff does believe that the dual designation of RT and Paratransit Inc. as CTSAs will help advance that goal, and we will continue to be providing data, analysis, and technical assistance to support innovative CTSA efforts here in Sacramento County and across the region. We'll also be monitoring this new service arrangement. Performance audits and budget reports from RT and Paratransit Inc. will be used to kind of inform the, how well these services are being provided over the coming year in this new arrangement. And we'll also continue to collaborate with both agencies to gain insights from other regions and identify potential new CTSA services that could be tested and implemented here in the SACOG region. I really appreciate the efforts of Barbara Von Bechtold and Mike Rawson from my transit team, who are looking into some of these new options and working with some of these providers. I just want to end by just expressing our SACOG staff appreciation for the impressive kind of coordination and work that Paratransit and Sacramento Regional Transit have put towards this transition over the last 6 months. I mean, they are working really hard to make this transition work for transit riders in Sacramento. And they've also launched, during this pandemic crisis, many valuable new emergency services that are really helping vulnerable populations. We want to continue to support them and other transit operators across the region as they struggle with this difficult time. Now, the 4 elements of the staff recommendation you see at the top of your staff report, these will allow the board to fulfill its responsibilities for this policy issue. Please let me know if you have any questions or comments.
Are there questions for Mr. Carpenter staff at this time? And I will note also,
I'm happy to look at him. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was going to say, he's not yet visible, but Director Saylor is now present.
Okay.
Thank you.
And Ms. Lee, do we have any public communication requests on this item?
We do. I have about 3 or 4. I can read them for you. I've received a public comment from Jeffrey Tartagia. His comment is in regards to the paratransit and RT formula breakdown. He says, paratransit had just got a formula increase as part of Prop A. What is the formula currently, prior, and what is proposed? Second, SACOG no longer provides funding to Natomas, leaving only 1 hour service of routes 11, 13, 86, 88, with several senior facilities and with several state agencies out there. Department of Aging, Department of Consumer. How has loss of dry shuttle service impacted services? Reason is reading through SDA Prop A, RT can be 38 to 43%, and I thought that public intended 1+% increase to paratransit. Was it increased senior population? Mr. Tartagia also requested that we forward his comments to Tiffany Fink, CEO of Paratransit, and also Henry Lee, General Manager and CEO of Sacramento Regional Transit District. We do have the reply sent to Mr. Tartagia from Tiffany Fink. Would the committee like me to share her response?
Why don't we complete the public communications first, and then we'll see what the will
Okay.
is.
No problem. I received a separate public comment from Henry Lee regarding item 2, not in response to Mr. Tartagia. His public comment is, SAC-RT is supportive of the staff recommendation. As stated in SAC-RT's letter attached to the item, the framework of this funding arrangement and service delivery plan was adopted by the SAC-RT board in January 2020. The funding allocation will allow SAC-RT to be effectively and efficiently launch our SAC-RT Go paratransit service on June 28th. SAC-RT will be the operator of ADA and non-ADA above and beyond demand response service, providing door-to-door demand response service to eligible seniors and persons with disabilities unable to use fixed route bus and light rail services due to a disability throughout the urban service area of Sacramento County. PI will continue to provide private contract transportation to social service agencies, travel training, and coordinated services throughout the county. SAC-RT's Mobility Advisory Council, which represents SAC-RT passengers with disabilities and seniors and advises SAC-RT staff and board directors on such matters, is also fully supportive of this action. We are grateful that SACOG is acknowledging SAC-RT's role in the delivery of this important service to our community, whether through a contract or directly provided. We look forward to our continued relationship with SACOG and PI in the delivery and coordination critical ADA paratransit, non-ADA demand response service to fragile senior and disabled populations and other human service transportation into the future. That concludes Mr. Lee's comment. I also have a public comment from Helen O'Connell. Would you like me to move forward with her comment?
Yes.
Okay. She says, we need to make sure that the people doing the job of providing the service are the ones that get the money and the riders receive the same, if not better, service. I would like to know what the percentages are for each partner of the partnership. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Lee. So let's return to the committee for any additional questions or discussion. Director Chenier?
Yeah, go ahead and move the item.
Director Slowey will second.
All right, so it's been moved by Director Chenier and seconded by Director Slowey. Seeing no hands raised or other indications of a member of the committee wishing to speak on the item, Ms. Lee, would you please call the roll?
Absolutely. Director Harris?
Yes.
Director Joyner?
Yes.
Director Peters?
Yes.
Director Samayoa?
Yes.
Thank you. Director Sander?
Yes.
Director Saylor?
Yes.
Thank you. Director Chenier?
Yes.
Director Slowey?
Yes.
Director Veerkamp?
Yes.
Vice Chair Jennings?
Yes.
Vice Chair Soon?
Yes.
Chair Cabaldon?
Yes. All right, so that motion carries. So we'll now proceed to item 3, which is 2020 Solutions for the Congested Corridors Program project nominations. Mr. Doherty?
Good morning, members
Nice
of the,
background.
thank you. This item is the SACOG project nominations for the SB1 Solutions for Congested Corridors program. This is the second cycle of this program that was created under SB1 and has approximately $493 million available statewide. This program requires agencies responsible for preparing the regional TIP to nominate projects to apply to the California Transportation Commission. SACOG is responsible for this for the 4-county region. We released a call for projects in March and received 3 projects back that were interested in pursuing this funding. SACOG is recommending that all 3 projects move forward to be nominated. Those projects are the Placer-Sacramento Gateway Phase 1 Implementation Project, the US 50 Integrated Corridor Management Implementation Project, and the Bridge Street Widening and Gap Closure Project. The program also requires that the nominating agency prioritize the nominated projects moving forward. SACOG used the scoring criteria from the Congested Corridors program to prioritize these projects, and a summary of that criteria is listed in Attachment B of the staff report. The prioritized ranking of the projects is also shown in Attachment A. The CTC also recently extended the application deadline for this program from June to July 17th due to the current pandemic, which will give a few more weeks of application preparation for our member jurisdictions. Staff is asking that the committee recommend to the board that these 3 projects be nominated for the Congested Corridors program. And with that, I'm available for any questions you may have.
There are questions for Mr. Doherty? And Ms. Lee, do we have any public communications on item 3?
It does not appear that we do.
All right. And
Chairman, Director Veerkamp, move the item.
Joyner, second.
All right. Is there any other question or discussion? All right, I'm definitely supportive of this. I think this is we're able to fund projects like or nominate projects like the Yuba City project here, but also some of the interjurisdictional projects that are so important in our region that cross boundaries and connect the region in ways that this is why in some ways, this is why we exist, is to be able to knit together a variety of funding sources in order to deal with issues that, especially those of us in smaller jurisdictions, couldn't accomplish all by ourselves, or that require a lot of us putting a little bit in order to accomplish something important. And so I'm especially encouraged to see the Yuba City project, but also the connectivity to Placer. That even though this is a 4-county nomination, our transportation system is so tightly interconnected. So I really appreciate the work that staff's done on this and the nominations that have come in. And a welcome also to Director Casey Lazon, who's looking very much like our chair, the board chair right now. Welcome.
Morning. Yes, I had to get this link in a pinch. So.
All right. So with that, then, Ms. Lee, would you please call the roll?
Absolutely. Director Harris?
Yes, and thank you very much.
Director Joyner?
Yes.
Director Peters?
Yes.
Director Samayoa?
Yes.
Director Sander?
Yes.
Director Saylor?
Yes.
Director Chenier?
Yes.
Director Slowey?
Yes.
Director Veerkamp?
Yes.
Vice Chair Jennings?
Yes.
Vice Chair Soon?
Yes.
And Chair Cabaldon?
Yes.
Thank you.
So that motion carries. So that brings us then to item 4, which is the final 2021 Regional Active Transportation Program Policy Framework. I know the members of the committee are aware, but although we normally make recommendations on items like this to the board has delegated authority to this committee in order to make the final, to take the final action on this pursuant to the extensive discussion that occurred at the last board meeting. So with that, Ms. Cacciatore.
Good morning. This is Victoria Cacciatore with SACOG staff. And as Director Cabaldon just noted, the April board delegated authority to the Transportation Committee to finalize the policy framework and authorize the executive director to send it over to California Transportation Commission for adoption at their June meeting. Next slide. I will cover a brief recap with what we are able to do with the Active Transportation Program to customize our region's awards from the framework that is established by the state, and also focus on two of the policy items that were discussed at the April board meeting prior to their delegating authority to this committee. Next slide. The ATP is a funding source for projects and programs that can increase biking and walking. Half of the funds are available through statewide competition, but MPOs like SACOG competitively award a portion of the remaining funds. The Active Transportation Program is administered by the California Transportation Commission and Caltrans, and SACOG works with EDCTC and PCTPA to implement the regional ATP. Next slide, please. So while many of you are familiar with this, it's worthy of reiterating because it is a novel fund program where projects first compete at the state, and then if they're unsuccessful there, they are referred to a regional competition. This offers two opportunities for projects to compete for funding, and it also, by the nature of how it's structured, encourages local agencies to select projects that speak to state goals for biking and walking in addition to what we identify regionally. Next slide, please. Here we have the state scoring criteria outlined to see what the state is prioritizing with their award of funding. This is emphasizing what the California Transportation Commission, through their experience implementing other funding programs and what they've heard from their outreach with statewide partners, feels that a biking and walking project should accomplish if they are to merit statewide funding. Since the state receives a wide range of project sizes and has also been encouraging larger awards to develop what they believe to be transformative projects, they've developed different applications and scoring rubrics based on the size and type of your proposed ATP project. What you'll see is that the state places the largest emphasis on the need for biking and walking facilities, and also that all projects are scored based on their benefit to disadvantaged community residents. Next slide, please. Here we have what is outlined in the proposed final regional ATP framework that is before you for action today. We shift the emphasis a little bit from the state program in a couple of different ways. For example, we have a metric for how the project is going to help us meet our greenhouse gas reduction targets, which includes a proposed link to Green Means Go that's identified in the policy framework you see today. We also include a metric for how the project increases economic prosperity in the community that it serves. Next slide, please. So these are the three policy changes that are in the final policy framework that are different from what you had reviewed in March. Include the integration of Green Means Go, like I just mentioned, strengthening the commitment to disadvantaged community residents, and a one-time reduction in the non-ATP funding requirement to compete in the regional ATP. The first two items were at the direction of this committee and to a lesser degree, the Land Use and Natural Resources Committee in March, while the reduction in non-ATP funding requirements was staff recommendation presented in the final policy framework. That was in response to what we saw playing out with local agencies between the March committee and the April board meeting. I'll focus on the last two issues with this discussion since those were the two items that received the majority of discussion at the April board meeting. Next slide, please. And one more, please. Next, please. Go back one, please. I think it went one too far. It's always fun to not be able to control your own presentation. So I think we can all empathize with that. Since the ATP was formed as a program, there's been a heavy emphasis on how the investments benefit disadvantaged community residents. This ties back to statute, where the original bill required that a minimum of 25% of all ATP funding provide benefits to disadvantaged community residents. How this has been interpreted by the California Transportation Commission, you can see through a snippet provided from the guidelines. They want investments to provide meaningful benefits to disadvantaged community residents. Next slide, please. The state ATP identifies 5 recognized statewide disadvantaged community definitions. These are meant to tie to on-the-ground conditions, such as what you will see with the metric that's tied to how many students receive free or reduced price meals at schools that a project might be serving, assessment of the median household income, and then also uses statewide tools, such as the CalEnviroScreen tool developed by the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, and also the Healthy Places Index, which was developed by a Public Health Alliance. There is also a recognition, though to a lesser degree, of regional definitions like what we use in our 2020 MTP SES. Next slide, please. So as part of our policy framework, we request the authority from CTC to add our disadvantaged community definition, which is the 2020 MTP SES Environmental Justice Areas map, as a definition of disadvantaged communities that has the same level of standing as the other statewide definitions that we just reviewed at a very high level. SACOG uses American Community Survey data through each MTP update to develop this map. We look at census block groups ever since the 2016 MTP SES, which is the smallest census level information that you can reliably get information across the entire region for. We look at areas where you have a population that is 70% or higher of non-white or Hispanic non-white and or Hispanic residents. Block groups where 45% or more of the households earn less than 200% of the federal poverty level, and also other vulnerabilities such as concentrations of households with older adults that are 75 or older, linguistically isolated households, low educational attainment households, and other groups that are agreed upon with SACOG and stakeholders to determine what creates the environmental justice areas in our community or in our region. So when you're looking at this map, you will see that there are these communities throughout the entire region in all of the counties and most of the cities that are home to residents of our environmental justice communities. When we are looking at how we meet this 25% state requirement of benefiting disadvantaged community residents, we focus our assessment on how the project fills a need for those residents. And that can take shape in different ways, where it's either creating neighborhood connections, or maybe it's actually connecting disadvantaged community residents to needed destinations outside of their community, like to get to schools or job centers. Next slide, please. So over the life of SACOG implementing the regional ATP, which has actually only been since about 2014, Roughly 2/3 of our total investments have benefited disadvantaged community residents by both improving neighborhood access, but also by filling network gaps throughout entire jurisdictions to connect communities and increase access to schools, shopping centers, transit stations, and creating safer networks for all people biking and walking. I would like to note that this is a per project, or it's not a per project requirement, but more a total investment level from the entire $11.7 million that we have to invest as a region, that you have a 25% requirement. Could you click on the slide, please? So you'll see that even with our lowest amount of funding benefiting disadvantaged communities, we're still easily meeting the state identified requirement. And could you click the slide one more time? The proposed regional goal of 35% is greater than the 25%, as we can all tell from basic math. And 35% reflects a discussion with our partners at EDCTC and PCTPA, who worked with us to implement the regional ATP. One of the concerns that they noted when we were looking at a higher threshold or a higher goal for the region was that they didn't want project sponsors to feel like they must decrease project scopes to the point where even if you were awarded funding, it's not going to provide a meaningful benefit to people biking and walking in the community. And they were also concerned that some project sponsors might sit out of the competition altogether, and though they do have needed biking and walking projects in their community. However, we're still striving to be above the minimum of the state requirement on this issue. The state has signaled that environmental justice is a priority area. You can see that from the new requirement of environmental justice elements in general plan updates as is required by SB 1000 to the even higher thresholds than 25% that are placed on other statewide funding sources like the Caltrans Sustainable Transportation Planning Grants and also cap and trade investments. And even the existence of the multiple statewide tools that are meant to determine and measure how our prior choices for land use and transportation investments have disproportionately and negatively impacted populations throughout the state and our region. Next slide, please. And onto the other topic that received the bulk of the conversation at the April board. Next slide, please. ATP does not require other funding to compete at the state level. And regionally, we have required non-ATP funds as a show of local commitment to the project that you're proposing, and to also make our limited funding go further. We've heard a lot of concern from our public works staff that is around the uncertainty for local budgets for coming years and increasingly bleak future funding outlooks. After a discussion with EDCTC and PCTPA, we are presenting a recommended 7% reduction as temporary relief for future local funding commitments, but also to still have project sponsors demonstrate a commitment to the project and to maintain some ability to leverage our regionally awarded dollars. This does mean that there would be $526,000 less that we can regionally award to other biking and walking projects, which is not insignificant, especially when you're looking at, we only have $11.7 million, but we did feel that it was something worth presenting to the board for discussion, given what our local agencies are reporting they are looking at for future budgets. And next slide. So we presented the policy framework to you as it was presented to the April board, since there wasn't a broad consensus on any one item, but more a wish to discuss it further at the committee level. So I'd like to open that up to you now.
All right, so we'll begin with questions from members of the committee, then we'll take any public communications that we may have received, and then return to the committee for discussion. So are there questions for staff at this point? Director Seward?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Hi, Victoria. Thank you for this presentation. I was wondering a couple things. One, you mentioned the state moving in the direction to further environmental justice, and you gave a couple of examples. Then why hasn't the state moved to increase this threshold from 25%? A second question is regarding your map that showed low-income and minority area census tract. When was that? I thought I heard you say maybe it was the latest, but I just wanted to confirm what was the latest update to that? Because I noticed a lot of discrepancies in our city.
Okay, to your first question of why the state hasn't increased the measure beyond 25% would be, I would presume, because they would need a new law to do that. The 25% was originally outlined in the legislation that created the active transportation program and merged all of the pre-existing Safe Routes School, bicycle transportation account, some recreational trails funding, put that all into one big program. And there, to the best of my recollection, no minimum for benefiting disadvantaged communities created one. And so they would need a new law, the 25% environment. To your question about the map, this is what was used in the 2020 MTP SES, and it uses the American Community Survey data from 2012. That was the most recent that we had available during the MTP update. As for why something may not show based on what you see at the local level, it could be related to the size of block groups, which are only updated every 10 years. So they're updated with the 2020 census. Staff has been working with jurisdictions such as Elk Grove and also with the Census Bureau to figure out the best way to update census block groups to reflect different, because the bulk of the work, I think, was between 2007, 2008, leading up to the 2010 census to designate block groups. And there's a lot of work that goes in with that, but I know that our staff has been working with both the Census Bureau and local staff to determine the best way to show block group data or show block groups in the upcoming census or in progress census.
And so when you're looking at disadvantaged communities, in the map, in the legend, you have low income, you have minority. Are all of those considered as in the disadvantaged community category? Or in other words, I guess what I'm getting at is if just by having the label of high minority, that automatically puts you in a disadvantaged community category?
Yes, let me go back to the numbers. If you have over 70% of the population in that block group, that is non-white and or Hispanic resident population. And throughout the region, we have 259 census block groups that are considered part of our environmental justice communities map as part of that definition.
Okay, so it's not like you take them, any one, it doesn't need to be a combination of the yellow, the pink, the blue. It's any one.
That is correct. They do note where there are overlaps, or if you have an area that has both over 70% of the non-white and or Hispanic resident population, and also 45% or more of the households earning less than 2,000% of the federal poverty level. So there's a recognition that there are some areas that meet both of those definitions, but generally it's all regarded as part of our regional environmental justice areas map.
Okay, thank you.
All right, are there other questions for staff at this time? All right, then Ms. Lee, we have public communications on this item.
There are no public communications for this item.
All right, then let's return it to the committee for discussion. Any comments on this item? Director Simmons.
Thank you, Chair Cabalden. Yeah, for our community, we, as I was noting, I think there definitely still seems to be a lag between the, the data. Obviously, you mentioned the census, going back to where they're pulling from, the American, I forgot the name of that, but wherever it's pulling from, I think it's not accurate from what we're seeing. But my point is, I guess, this increase would put us at a little bit more disadvantage in our community. There's a lot of projects that it would hinder our ability to compete for, and that creates an issue for me to support this. The 25% state allocation is there already, and we already exceed that. I'm just not certain why we need to increase a threshold that we're already exceeding. Those are my comments for now. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Vice Chair. Other comments? Director Joyner.
Chris, maybe I'm misunderstanding. Darren is suggesting that we're going to set as a requirement the 35%. My understanding is we leave it at 25 and set 35 as a target. Is that not correct?
Yes, that would be correct. The 35% is a goal that is set for the region and is included as goal-based language as opposed to requirement-based language.
Right. So the requirement remains 25%.
Yes.
Thank you.
And Director Joyner and Director Soon, I do just want to weigh in here too, if I may, and say that part of this is not just about that map. We are actually trying to make sure that we have a broader definition of disadvantaged communities than the state gives us, but it's also about connecting projects that connect disadvantaged communities as well, which is part of the reason I think we've done so well in the past. So, and these you'll see this in a lot of other grant programs. So Director Joyner, you're correct, which is that has been the staff recommendation, have a goal of 35%. And just want to make sure people are aware it's not just within that map. You can be outside that map, but if you're connecting disadvantaged communities, as I understand it, that still gets you points.
Well, and that's where I'm confused still then, because what's the material effect? The goal is 25. You've shown from history, the last 4 years or since the program in effect in 14, you've achieved 70 plus. What would be the purpose of setting a goal that is above the requirement but below what we've already done? I just don't see the practicality of implementing this new goal.
Director Sander.
Sure. Well, maybe I can answer Darren's question there. I have also watched this develop. I serve on the League of California Cities Revenue and Taxation Committee, and we've watched this map develop and the messiness of it over time. I can tell you there's errors in there from Rancho Cordova's perspective. There's areas with zero population that are, huge spots on the map. So it's kind of interesting. But in any case, I think this is in line with what SACOG has been working on over the last MTP and our new MTP, because we've had priorities like fix it first. We've also had priorities talking about what do we do with these old commercial corridors. And in many of those cases, you're dealing with neighborhoods that have very few economic resources compared to what might be going on at the edge of new growth. So in these older neighborhoods, you don't have a lot of economic activity. You don't have a lot of fees coming in from new development or even redevelopment to try to upgrade old facilities. So you have to rely on something else. And for jurisdictions to have a large share of these older neighborhoods, the burden is enormous, if not insurmountable. So I would say, you know, keeping us where we are in terms of a goal like this doesn't just benefit those specific jurisdictions. It benefits the region, because if we have neighborhoods or jurisdictions that are sliding into serious disrepair, it drags us all down. We're really not in our own little cocoon here. We're all working together in this region. And I can think of numerous cases over recent years where applications have come to SACOG from what are basically disadvantaged communities. And because they don't have enough money perhaps for fancy staff work, or perhaps they just don't have enough local match, they don't get funded. And I think any sort of boost that we can give to those communities deserves some recognition at the regional level. So I would propose we just sort of keep status quo.
So, Director Sanders, the status quo, or status quo what's in the recommended action? Or?
Well, we could. I would not support any change below the target level that we had previously. And if 35 is our proposal here, then I would support that as a goal, not a requirement.
Other comments? I thank you very much for that, but for the clarification, Director Joyner, and then for your comments, Director Sanders, the nation's leader on the secondary suburbs and some of the challenges that we're facing in terms of our communities. Like both Elk Grove and Rancho Cordova, we've also had lots of questions about the designations of specific tracks, and of course any sort of statewide or even region-wide designation is not going to capture the flavor of each of our actual communities on the ground. But also to to our executive director's comment, in terms of the connectivity options and what have you, it provides at least a good enough approximation in most cases. And so, like most cities in the region, we have a 25 or 35% of our city falls into one of these areas, and that's good enough for government work in terms of being able to get most of our projects funded while also meeting the real needs that are happening on the ground. So I'm also supportive of this framework. The staff has brought this forward to us because the committee recommended it a couple of years ago. I don't recall exactly the genesis of it, but I do know as we did our regional forum and had the Brookings reports, and one of the areas highlighted in that report jointly between us and the chamber and GSEC and others was that we needed to focus on inclusion and focus on some of the equity issues in the region, and so we were highly attuned to those questions during that period, and I think this is the result of that being reflected in the document. But as has been emphasized, doesn't change the outcome of the projects. It's simply a signal about what matters to us as a region and what we're trying to collectively achieve. So, Director Samayoa.
Thank you. I guess I was trying to figure out the connection that Director Soon was making between the data and the mapping and the changing the line from 25 to 35%. So I guess I'm a little. I also have a bit of an issue with kind of the way it's mapped and how Marysville's mapped. I think it might be missing out on some of our realistic things going on at the local level. But I think I agree with Director Cabaldan that this is a way for us to signal what's important to our area to assure that we connect some of our communities that tend to be left behind, given that we do have probably more than is being reflected on that map. So I'm okay with changing it to 35% as a goal, just because we met it already, and it's just, again, just kind of maybe just showing or highlighting what's important to our region to assure that we find ways to support our communities that maybe haven't had those chances to have connections to services or other things, and we can use these investments to make those things. And my thought is, I don't know if we're going to have this conversation in a separate discussion. So given that, I do support raising the goal to 35%. But the second question, I think, is like the $500,000 reduction in projects that would be caused by reducing it from 11% or so to 7%. I'm also okay with that in the sense that it would make us a bit more competitive, especially at the smaller communities and most localities for us to. It is even that 11% is hard for us to try to meet and be able to put proposals. It would make it a little easier to make it a 7%. So I'm okay with lowering that threshold, and I know that's a separate discussion, but I'm okay with having the goal 35% that would reflect kind of our priorities within our region.
Thank you, Director Zamayo, and thanks for leading us to the second topic that we hadn't discussed yet. And I know I had raised the loudest objection to this change, or at least to the not having that change come to this committee. And I'm still concerned about it. I'm kind of looking ahead to when we actually make these awards, and at least one, maybe all of us, have our projects be right below the line, and we'll be asking staff and each other, well, what's it going to take to get the, I have this really great project and it just missed funding. And what can we do about that? And the answer is whatever we could have done about it was what we're doing right now. So the public works director, for my city, and I just want to, this issue comes up a lot. Public works speaks for us in terms of project delivery, but they don't represent the city as a whole. The planning department is just as much involved in like, what should our next, what area should we be investing in order to provide better mobility and connectivity, or just our economic development department is driving what should we be doing in order to support new business and new development. Public works isn't the planning enterprise within our city. So of course, once they have the project, they just want to make sure that it costs as little as possible. So I get that, but they're not, even in my own city, they're not the representative of the total city's perspective on this issue. And so as a council member and a mayor, I don't want to have to not have my project, not get a project at all, and watch, it's cities, smaller cities that have these $500,000 projects that are in the mix. And I'm concerned that in terms of making these sort of, off the top policy changes that it reduces the ability of jurisdictions in order to get the funding in the first place. But we don't see that until it's too late, right? You never know in this game of Russian roulette where your bullet falls in the gun. And I've been right below the line too many times to take for granted that shaving one project off the list is going to have an effect. So I'm not a fan of this proposal. I'm definitely not going to throw my body in front of the entire item over this. But I do think, and just giving us a window into the future when we all look at that list and see that we're number 6 out of 5, that we may regret the choices that we're making today. All right, is there any other? Yeah, Director Samayoa.
Thank you. I guess what I'd like to not propose, but I mean, I think given that the state, there's a state opportunity out there to go for our proposals to go, move forward first. And I know that staff at SACOG, they do a great job on supporting us and with our applications whenever we need it. And I think even Caltrans are willing to kind of support us in some way, shape, or forms with information. But I guess for me is, I think that's where we can maybe add value to our proposals to the state, is trying to find the best way to make them the most competitive, or add kind of reviewing our applications through different filters so that we can get the highest competitive applications out there. So then hopefully we even more proposals at the local level as well, so we can try to get the statewide monies as much as we can, and then so then that might alleviate some of the issues that we're talking about as well.
All right, Vice Chair Soon.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Cabaldon. Yeah, I mean, I'm not, gonna throw myself on the sword for this either, but if it's aspirational and it moves us, towards more economic prosperity. But I'd ask, I guess, if SACOG, the staff does great work, but you can only do what you can only do. Your work is reliant upon good data, right? And we've always talked about having that data. If the maps that are showing our communities aren't accurate, then the decisions we're making may not be as well informed as they could be. So I guess I just request, we may need to look at something more than what we're currently using, I guess, it would be my request there.
Is there other question or discussion on this item? All right, seeing none, is there a motion then on the item?
Mr. Chairman, this is Saylor. I would like to move approval of the staff recommendation on this item.
Director Veerkamp seconds.
All right, so Director Saylor moves, Director Veerkamp seconds. I see Director Jennings' real hand in the screen, but okay, that's not a raised hand. All right, so then Ms. Lee, would you please call the roll?
Yes. Director Harris?
Yes.
Director Joyner?
Yes.
Director Peters?
Aye.
Thank you. Director Samayoa?
Aye.
Director Sander?
Aye.
Director Saylor?
Aye.
Director Chenier?
Aye.
Director Slowey?
Aye.
Director Veerkamp?
Aye.
Vice Chair Jennings?
Aye.
Vice Chair Soon?
Aye.
Chair Cabaldon?
Aye. So that motion carries. So that concludes our action items for the morning. So now we'll proceed to item 5, which is policy framing for the 2020 SACOG regional funding round. Is that you, Garrett?
That's me.
Okay.
Well, good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to present today. This item really kicks off the board's multi-month policy deliberation on what approach to take to the 2020 funding round. This is an item that Matt Carpenter and I jointly prepared. I'll be giving the presentation, but Matt and I will both be available for questions and comments during the committee's deliberation this morning. As a reminder, when we talk about the SACOG funding round, what we're talking about, this is the part of the work program where the board acts and decides how to award the agency's share of discretionary state and transportation revenues that SACOG as the regional agency administers. So it is a good point of comparison to the item you just acted on the ATP program, which is a state program. We're talking about today, and this item is the SACOG funding round, which is a regional program, and the SACOG board is the acting body. So there's discretion that the board has in this. It is, of course, a major element of our agency work plan, a way to implement our long-range plan. But it just funds transportation projects in the 4-county region of Sacramento, Sutter, Yolo, and Yuba, and that transportation projects in Placer and El Dorado counties have separate funding programs. At the onset of each funding round, the board engages with what you're starting today in a policy discussion on what approach to take to the round that looks at the sort of priorities that the board has for the round and trade-offs and different approaches. For context, in the last 10 years, the board has employed a competitive approach to the funding round, where the board acts on a framework that sort of specifies its objectives and goals for the round. Staff then releases a call for projects in programs that meet those priorities of the board. We convene working groups to evaluate the projects, and then we submit a staff recommendation to the board on projects to fund. From a regional perspective, we think there's strength to this competitive approach. We talk about in the staff report, for example, we think it's a successful way to implement the long-range plan, Metropolitan Transportation Plan, Sustainable Community Strategy, and the policy goals of that. We think it helps the region meet the federal and state performance objectives and policy goals that are placed on SACOG as the regional entity, such as, for example, the greenhouse gas reduction target placed on the region from the state, or federal safety and performance management and system management requirements. We think the approach can help position the region for state and federal competitive funding that also employ a performance-based paradigm, and has also been helpful in maintaining the region's stellar delivery record, of which we're state leader. So that's, again, just a perspective on the existing approach. But one of the themes we wanted to emphasize in the presentation and in the staff report is that there are trade-offs in any approach, and we very much recognize that. And there's alternative ways to do the funding round. And indeed, the round has evolved through time. In 2019, which was the last funding round, the board engaged in a multi-month policy discussion like you will undertake today on what approach to take to the funding round, asking many of these same questions, focused on the spectrum of a fully competitive program, which is employed for the past 10 years, on to the other end of the spectrum of a more formulaic program, which other agencies use in their funding programs. And the board weighed the pros and cons of each because they each will have their own set of trade-offs. In 2019, the board ultimately decided on a hybrid approach, which maintained the competitive nature of the round. It simplified applications, but it did expand guaranteed funding for planning and project development activities. So that's where the board last acted on the regional funding round. In the build up for this 2020 item, staff has been engaging with partners and stakeholders across the 4-county region. And that culminated in a series of workshops a few weeks ago for partners in all 4 counties. And not surprising, given the diversity of the region, there is a diversity of interest and opinion on the funding round. We've heard some positive comments on the round, including some changes we made the last 2 cycles in streamlining in our data tool, which gives a sort of consistent and transparent sort of baseline for the round, and its help in this sort of performance environment and competing in our own state programs. We've also heard concerns on the approach, and we very much want to make sure that the staff report reflects those concerns that we have heard. Some of the concerns we've heard that we talk about in the staff report are the concern in a competitive program about the lack of certainty and predictability, and the ability then for member agencies to implement their capital improvement programs. We've heard concerns from some on if the projects are funded through the round meet local priorities. We've heard questions raised about the time and resources it takes to apply through the funding cycle, as well as the process to evaluate and select projects. And as part of your board packet, you do have a public comment that crystallizes many of these concerns and offers an alternative proposal for the committee and the board to consider for the 2020 funding round that employs a more formulaic approach. So we appreciate that public comment, and we welcome any other additional public comments during this committee cycle, future board meetings, and the discussion that will take place in the subsequent month. So in the past, one key input that the committee and board has considered is that stakeholder feedback. We also talk about a second sort of theme in the staff report of new developments the last time the board deliberated on the funding round. The 2 we speak to in the staff report, the first is that the region is in what's called an air quality conformity lockdown, a bit of a complex technical term, but you may recall this in the context of the update of the plan last fall, where there's a federal rule that's invalidated the air quality model that all of the state of California uses. So this is not just an issue to SACOG, but all of the state, which will make it difficult or impossible for the region to bring forward new expansion projects. Yet we know that we need a good pipeline of projects in the region to make sure we maintain our region's delivery record. So what will funding round look like in this current air quality conformity lockdown is the first issue we raise. The second, of course, is the disruptions caused by COVID, which is very much a live issue. Its effect on fuels tax, sales tax, local agency time. We heard very clearly in the workshops, those are concerns raised by member agencies and partners, and this is very much an ongoing issue. So what would a funding round look like in light of the recent public health developments? We conclude the staff report with a couple key questions we hope will inform the committee's conversation today. The first is, what direction will you have to us as staff as we develop a staff recommendation next month on that main question of the approach to the funding round between a competitive end and a formulaic end, and what sort of options in the middle and a hybrid approach. What interest as well is there from the committee on the board in a possible stimulus program for the 2020 funding round that responds to the air quality conformity lockdown and COVID. I should emphasize that this would be a policy deliberation the board would take on the regional component of the funding round, i.e. this would be using some regional dollars in a stimulus. It's a different issue than a federal stimulus you may have heard James talk about. And then third, there is a standing board policy priority for the last several rounds of a focus on small and medium-sized projects. We have heard interest from some member agencies of maintaining that policy interest, but others concerns around that. So again, this is just an issue framing presentation. very much imagine a full dialogue at the committee and at the board this month, and appreciate and welcome any public comments. We will be working to develop a staff recommendations we will bring to this committee for recommendation next month and for action for the full board next month on the approach to the 2020 funding round. So with that, that concludes the staff presentation, and I will be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
All right, if there's no objection, if there are technical questions, why don't we take those now? Otherwise, I assume, I know we have public communications on this item. Is that correct, Ms. Lee? So if we could get those onto the record first. But are there technical questions for Mr. Valarosa or Mr. Carpenter at this point? All right, then, Ms. Lee, would you please share with us a public comment?
Sure. I received a public comment from Brent Berniger on behalf of Sacramento Regional Transit District. He says, SAC-RT appreciates the SACOG board leadership and vision as we navigate these uncertain times and believes that a streamlined and transparent funding process is in the best interest of all jurisdictions. SAC-RT is supportive of a regional approach to allocating these funds to achieve our ambitious goals and objectives laid out in the adopted MTP. As we move through this process, we would like to stress the importance of providing transportation funding levels that are equal or near those levels that we agreed upon in recent Measure A and STA allocations. This level of funding will help the region move forward to meeting the MTP document goals of reducing greenhouse gas goals by 19% and better quality of life, which benefits all of us in this community. We would like to thank the board for taking up this issue and hearing these comments that we hear from our riders, the communities we serve, and our board members. That concludes his comments.
And that's the only comment we've received on this item?
That is the only public comment on this item, yes.
All right, thank you. Director Slowey.
Thank you. Before you start there, how do you plan to acknowledge people on the phone, not on Zoom?
They have the ability to press *9 to raise their hand, or if they're participating on a computer, they can go into the participants window and raise their hand. There's a button in there that will allow them to raise their hand.
Thank you.
I'll also call you right after Director Slowey, because I'm taking that as a signal that you might have a comment. Director Peters, thanks.
So right up front, I'm going to apologize. Somebody's at my house, so if my dog starts barking, I don't have a mute button for him. I wish I did, but in any case, I also want to draw your attention to the document that was sent out to all of us, submitted on behalf of many of the general service and public works departments throughout the region. So I want to, I love SACOG. SACOG does a good job. Staff does a good job. But, the 2 points I want to talk about briefly are the lack of certainty and the time and the resources to put together some of these requests for competitive bids. The history of citrus heights were 22 years old. When the original Measure A came through, one of the requirements was if you had general fund money going into roads, you couldn't lower that threshold. You had to keep it in order to qualify. Well, we had zero, so that wasn't hard to continue funding because we became a city during that time. But a couple of things happened when the original Measure A, and again, I'm only referring to Sac County, so sorry for the rest of your history lesson. But when the original Measure A expired and the new Measure A came about, one of the things they added in there was new road miles into the formulaic plan. Well, as you all know, Citrus Heights is pretty much built out, and I'd venture to say since in the last 22 years, we've probably built less than 5 miles of new roads. So our Measure A funding for roads essentially was cut in half. I don't want to say it all went to Rancho and Elk Grove, but they were happy to receive some of our money. So when I look at today, what we have to budget with, it's, reduced Measure A funding, yes, gas taxes, but obviously, currently that's down, and same with, SB1 funding, that's based on sales tax. So I look at you know, right now we don't have a lot of money that we can program into our budget for certainty. We're an older community, and just like everybody else, our roads need, you know, fix it first to go there. On a recent bid that, you know, pat ourselves on the back, we actually were awarded money through SACOG, and overall we've done well. I mean, don't get me wrong, I have no complaints about the competitive bidding, but I will say that when I look at that application process, there's a lot of checkboxes in there that maybe from a local end, and I'm not just saying Citrus Heights, but other entities might not necessarily think are applicable for every project. In the particular project I'm thinking about, you know, we spent almost 40 grand on a consultant to put together the package for us. Again, it was awarded, so that was worth the money. But the other thing that kind of was an aha moment to me, and then I started looking at some others, you know, that project was probably 30% over cost over what we would have initially done on our own. And when I say that, you know, we had sidewalks on one side of the street that abutted, you know, curb and gutter sidewalk, the other side periodic sidewalks. So, you know, yeah, we would have put, you know, doing it ourselves, one, we would have fixed the road, two, we would have put, you know, sidewalk on the other side. But to hit the bells and whistles under the new program, we, you know, now we're putting planters between the street and the sidewalk, and that leads to additional expense, not only in materials, but, you know, eminent domain and property taking. And again, left to our own, the residents of Citrus Heights on this particular street, they don't give a rat's patootie about the sidewalks. They want the road fixed. So, you know, when I look at the overall effort that sometimes we go through, while I think it's good, and I'm not discounting some of SACOG's, you know, pluses, but I also really look at, you know, the fact that we cannot on our own, on an annual basis, plan for very much work because we don't know what funding's coming in because we have to apply for, you know, 70% of what we get. So I personally am in support of the 5-page memo that came out that, you know, talks about a formulaic. I mean, I know that's what they do in El Dorado and Placer. There was, you know, and I'm interested in hearing what everybody else has to say. But for me, we need additional funding in order to plan for it. And, you know, every time we apply, we don't get it. We know that it's not 100% guarantee, but that just puts us further behind on planning for fixing overall efforts within the city. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Christopher.
All right, thank you so much, Director Slowey. Mr. Carpenter, a clarification, then we'll turn to Director Peters.
Yes, thank you, Chair Cabaldon. I just wanted, it's just connected to what Director Slowey just said. I just want to make sure the technical clarification that there is a public works proposal that is considered a public comment. It's the one that's in the packet and reflects the signature of 8 public works agencies. So just to distinguish, we have 2 public comments, the one from RT as well as that public works proposal. They're both considered public comments for this committee meeting.
All right, Director Peters.
Well, that was going to be my first comment, was the directors of 10 jurisdictions signed on to a memo that is a public comment, and what is the plan to make that part of this meeting?
So Mr. Ballard-Rosa directly referenced and summarized that memorandum, as did Director Slowey. It's in the record. We have received it as a written communication. It wasn't submitted for oral presentation, and it exceeds the word limitation on the oral presentations, but it is in the record as a comment, and all members of the committee have received it at least once, maybe twice, directly from staff, and it is also available to the public.
Okay, thank you. Then I would just go on and say, I am strongly in support of the DOT director's proposal, and 10 jurisdictions of the 4 counties have also their directors of transportation have signed on it, and the reasoning has to do, well, really, as is laid out in the memo, it's the lack of predictability in funding, the cost to keep submitting projects. Piecemealing is a big phobia for me. I have a project in Carmichael that many of you have been out to have a SACOG meeting at Milagro, and that section of Fair Oaks Boulevard was originally scheduled to be done in one phase at a cost of around $11 million. And I don't really recall what happened, and maybe it was a recession around 2010, 11, 12. It got divided up into 3 phases, and we are now about 10 years into getting midway through the 3rd phase. Costs have gone up, as you might imagine, and a renewal of the downtown nature of Carmichael has been dramatically slowed. And of course, with the recession we're about to go into here, it's going to make it even harder for them for the owners of those projects to, put on a happy face and occupy all the buildings and create a vibrant downtown. The maintenance and upgrading of existing infrastructure is falling far behind, and I think that the jurisdictions whose priority it is to fix it first have not been able to utilize sufficient money to address those priorities. And those constituents that drive on those roads belong to all of us. I have always firmly believed in fix it first because I think you have to have a strong foundation before you continue with other projects, because it gets harder and harder to get consensus for these additional projects if we can't prove that we have the ability to, in this case, fix the roads that we have. And Placer and El Dorado get their money on a formulaic basis, and I haven't heard any complaints that it seems to work. And we're all different. We can and do build within the MTP SCS, and we want to build our priority projects that serve all of our constituents. So I am in firm agreement with the guaranteed or formula funding. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Peters. Other comments or discussion? Director Soon?
Thank you. I want to start off by saying I fully recognize the need for us to stick together as a region, and it's a big region, right? But I think there is a need for us to continue to move in one direction, and I think the MTP SCS does that. It keeps us aligned on a certain path. And so one of the concerns I wanted to address in the process that I've been made greater aware of is our ability to address local priorities, as Director Peters was just referencing. Once you get past that threshold of an MTP SCS criteria, that the local jurisdictions are able to then prioritize what needs to get done first in their community. And so if a formula percentage is a way to do that, then I accept that. If there's another way, I'm open to that. Perhaps a weighted scoring criteria that would be measured against an MTP CS scoring. That if you had 2 projects within a jurisdiction that essentially met the MTP SCS criteria, but maybe one was greater than the other, but when you add in the local priority, that the second project rose above that, that's a situation where I think is worth discussing, or that option is worth discussing. And then I also want to address there's been conversations or concerns about geographical equity, and I want to look at it or couch it in a different way. The more urban areas well, first, let me just say, as you all know, SACOG, we're made up of rural, urban, suburban areas. And so the urban areas are just geared towards towards competing against things that reduce vehicle miles traveled. And so you can't expect a 6-year-old to run a race against a 12-year-old. I mean, that's always going to be a challenge. They're never, 6-year-old's never going to win, but you want that 6-year-old to catch up. You want the rural communities, the suburban communities to make progress and be able to reduce vehicle miles traveled. And so in my opinion, we've got to find a way to enable these communities to make greater progress. And so if the odds, for lack of a better term, are kind of stacked against these other communities from achieving those goals, then I don't think as a region, we're going to make as good a progress as we can. So I think we need to be thoughtful about this, but I think we do have to find a way to make sure the unincorporated counties, the suburban areas, the rural areas are able to make greater progress in reducing vehicle miles traveled, reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And then just to recap, being able to emphasize and implement their local priorities. Thank you.
Sorry, thanks, Vice Chair Soon. We have I know several of the committee members are going to jump in a second. I'm old enough to remember when we didn't do it this way, and why. And I think we sometimes think that we're like the original 13 colonies that came together and decided, all the money came to us by formula, and then we decided to put our money together and start working as a region. And that's a little bit of the story, and that's the story we tell ourselves often, but it never worked that way. And when Bill Hughes was the chair of this board from Citrus Heights and led the way to move towards a more regional approach to funding allocations, we did that partly because we thought it was the right thing to do, and we said all the right things about being in one region and about how the road or the bike path doesn't stop at our border, it has to go on. We did all of that. But we're also operating under an air quality lockdown, like what Mr. Corliss has described earlier, but much more severe because it only applied to us, and it was as a result of litigation. So we did it because we had to, and every jurisdiction in the region said, hey, we got to make these air quality improvements wherever we can get them, right? We don't want to send the money, don't send money to me in West Sac to make VMT reductions if we can get better reductions in Galt, right? We got it, because we're all going to die together if we don't pick our best opportunities to make progress on that. That's how it started. Then it became baked into SB 375 and then the Senator Kopp's legislation, which gave us the ability to program state and federal money. We don't have any regional money to program. This isn't our money that we're allocating. It's money that's coming from the state and the federal governments, and the state money in particular has has specific requirements about what it's supposed to achieve and to accomplish. And so, unlike the federal government that could just say, hey, let's write a stimulus check, we have a fixed pot of money that comes with these requirements. And SB 375 in particular requires that we make allocations and plan on the basis of these regional objectives. And so we're not real, my concern is we're not in a position to say, okay, West Sac, what's your favorite project? And if you want to build all your roads first and then maybe do the sidewalks later and the bike lanes later, but it's okay because it's in the MTP. The problem with that is MTP aside, we still have to hit the 19% for climate emissions. We still have to hit the particulate matter requirements for the air, for the Clean Air Act and for that lockdown. We're still held accountable as a region together. And if we're not making, even if you don't care about biking or emissions or those other dimensions, we all lose not just a little bit of money, but potentially all of the money. So it's high stakes in that space. And it's hard to imagine the legislature and the governor not noticing if we were to determine that we were no longer going to make our programmatic allocations on the basis of the policies that both are in state law, but also that we have adopted. I also worry about our ability to press forward on Green Means Go and say, hey, we need more resources because we're going to devote them to the highest priority, the biggest opportunities to reduce VMT and emissions and some of the climate impacts as well, when at the same time we would be taking the exact reverse step of withdrawing from sort of regional priority setting and instead moving to a formula-based system. And I think that, you know, the one other dimension of what was noted kind of briefly in the staff report is that we are one of the top regions in the state on project delivery. You know, all the reviews and the criteria in the committee, you know, the technical committees that look at each of our projects and says, hey, we know you love your project, Mayor, in West Sac. It's amazing, it's fantastic, but you know, we're not sure it's going to be buildable, or maybe you don't have the funding right, or whatever. And there's a better project in Winters right now, so we're going to go with that one. And by making those decisions, hassle though it might be for those of us that just wish we got a blank check, we've achieved, you know, one of the best delivery records in the state. Now that's not just for getting the ribbon. It's not for the trophy. It's by doing that, we're able to capture money that would have gone to other regions and instead comes to us to fund projects, especially in the smaller jurisdictions for which a couple $1 million in transfers from Riverside or San Diego or other parts of the state can make all the difference in terms of moving a project forward. So you know, the pain that we're all feeling about uncertainty and about you know, wanting to deal with the projects that we know in our own cities are the most important projects is real. I feel it just like everyone else does. But we don't have a million degrees of freedom here to choose whatever we wish to do. But also we do all hang together in almost the literal sense that you know, we could lose it all if we get this wrong. We're different from Placer and El Dorado in the sense that just the sheer asymmetry between our two biggest jurisdictions and the rest of us is enormous. You know, and obviously the difference between Roseville and Loomis is not trivial, but the difference in scale and in project size and in political power between these jurisdictions is huge. And so giving Winters an annual allocation by formula of $8 and saying, hey, good luck building the rail bridge that you need, or building the new interchange that you need, and just save your formula money for the next 27 years, and hopefully you'll be able to pull that project off, is not realistic. That's for small jurisdictions. The formula basis is seductively attractive and completely problematic in terms of ever being able to build any kind of meaningful project. So I think all the reasons that this has come forward are the right ones. And I've lived with Director Slowey and Director Peters on this board for a long time, and I share their concern about Fix It First and about some of the issues around fiscal certainty, whatever. But I think this is a dangerous path to go down in terms of the region, but even more selfishly, it's a dangerous path for our individual jurisdictions, especially those of us that aren't as large in terms of being able to move projects forward. All right, Director Samayoa, who will be followed by Director Chenier and then Saylor.
I guess I agree that there's some real frustrations especially in the application process, and I think there's probably some room to find ways to reduce some of those headaches or costs. And so I think there is probably a place where those discussions can continue. So I think local staff and our SACOG staff, there's probably, we need to find a way that those discussions can continue happen and have a dialogue or a forum or a place where they can have and kind of reach to some agreements to reduce some of those frustrations that are being listed in their proposal. I think they're real, and but I do having some issues with kind of you know, this has become a war between local priorities and kind of the regional priorities. As we know, those local priorities can change fairly quickly depending on the election cycle. And I know we have a lot of pressure from our constituents to assure that we're taking care of our needs at the local level, and our roads are continue to be deteriorated. And our priorities will tend to be different at the local level and at the regional level. But I really, from my perspective, things like the replacement of the Fifth Street Bridge, between the two counties is a great example of something that would not have happened without the regional support and having the regional benefits that it's providing. It was a great project and will be completed in July, but without the support of the region, that particular project would never have been completed just at the local level or between even the two counties and the cities. So if we would have got some type of formula-based funding. So for me, the benefits of doing it regionally is a lot greater than the sum of the smaller benefits at the region whose priority may change throughout time a lot faster than our regional approach. So I support where we currently are because I believe it's best for the region as a whole, because the benefits are a lot greater if we continue working together. But I think there's probably room to have discussion between the local staff and our SACOG staff to try to find ways to reduce some of the real frustrations that they may have.
Thank you. Director Chenier.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So a couple things. First, Matt, just if could ask just questions on the timing of a decision or direction that you all need. I know you said you want to bring this back in a month for a final vote, but do we have any leeway in there, and what does that look like?
Yes, Director Scheer, there certainly is leeway. And prior funding rounds, a lot of the time it was tied to the submittal of a Regional Transportation Improvement Program, or RTIP, to the state. We don't have those ties right now. We are, what the funds behind the programming round are, their forecast future funds, right? Part of our push, though, is make sure we're talking about some of the policy discussions early with the board, because we know there's a lot of eagerness to have dollars in the system to start to implement some projects, but there's not a requirement that this happens fast. Our current thinking was that the questions we've asked, these are the policy questions where we know there's a diversity of opinion out there from the stakeholders we've reached, to get some clarity from the board. Do you want us to look at a stimulus program? Do you want us to consider hybrid options for how funds would be programmed? All those policy questions in the memo are ones that we hope that with some clarity today about, we get a green light to go forward to develop something that would be more of a framework for June. Whether or not that June framework goes into great detail, as you may recall, some frameworks also include guidelines that are quite detailed, is at the discretion of you and your colleagues on the board. We were also planning to do, and it's a very important element for June, was to come back with a fund estimate. There's a lot of volatile revenues right now. We believe that can help inform what the board wants to do. As you know from prior funding rounds, it was comprised of a number of different specific programs. So we wanted to make sure you knew be available. And then based on the response of the committee and the direction we're getting this week from all the board policy committees, we'd have a better sense of how broad of a range of options do you want us to explore. And so our hope is that with that we can at least advance the conversation in June, but the short answer is that we have time, if you choose to have this even to go as late as August, to make some decisions. But we are very sensitive to some of the eagerness by many of our local stakeholders to have funds available to start to get projects going.
Right. So my thinking on this too is if we could ask you, and I want to go into it a little bit more, but if we could ask you to do some various scenarios and what that would look like, and come back in June with that, and then look at, I don't know if we don't have a meeting in July or August to do a final. To me, that allows us the opportunity to think through some of these things with a little bit more depth. I certainly understand the frustration around uncertainty and some of those other pieces, and would ask that this is not a binary decision, and we can also look at hopefully some, as Ricky said, and I totally agree, can we look at some alternative ways that the locals could get a little bit more certainty without changing the overall manner that we're funding. I mean, this is a pretty classic now versus the future, and local versus region. And I think the reason that SACOG has been so successful over the years is because SACOG as a board has really been able to look out at the bigger picture and then build back into what do we need to do collectively to make that bigger picture. I think Christopher laid it out really well, and I would never challenge his history on all of this with the experience that he's had on the board. I'm in very much agreement with what both the chair and the future chair have said of, you know, we need to address some of these issues, absolutely. But if we start thinking only about our own jurisdictions, and I don't necessarily agree with my own public works people, and I have I've actually been out a little bit, so the letter might have looked different had I been here. We have some internal discussions to have around how this is a policy decision. It's not a public works decision, and understanding all the public works directors that come together is one thing, but this is our leadership and where we want to go as a region. And I think we have an obligation to really think through that and understand where we are and what the goals that we have as a region. We can't make them if we start dividing this up. This is a very similar conversation, and I'm having a little bit of deja vu. I'm sure Darren is too, as we work through Measure A, which is only one county, but thinking a lot about some of these trade-offs as well. If we think about the big picture, it's not about how much money you put in, how much money you get out, or what your population is. It's really about the health of the region. And again, if we can keep that as a bottom line as our goal, and then work back into how we do it to try to address some of these questions, particularly around the uncertainty and around the the application process. I know it's been streamlined. Can we do better on that? Do we want to think about multi-year grants or multi-year scenarios where you're actually applying for money for multiple years, so that you don't have to reapply every year, or there's a very shortened application and you have some certainty of what you can do. I think there's answers out there to address some of the main concerns while not throwing the baby out with the bathwater on this.
Thank you, Director Shingley. We'd welcome the chance to develop some scenarios that try to address the balancing that you've described. We're also looking for ways to leverage some of the opportunities out there, including the STA board's interest in looking at how an economic stimulus could be leveraging their dollars, and some of the economic prosperity partners we have for more public-private investment. We think there's lots of options we could develop for your consideration for June.
No, I appreciate that. And I think this is such an important issue, because what we do on this issue really will point the direction of SACOG as an organization for a long time. And so I think if it takes us an extra month, we need to get this right.
Thank you.
All right, mindful of the time and the directors that wish to speak on the item, let's go to Director Saylor next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the conversation and the careful discernment that's underway here. I find myself very much in agreement with Directors Samoya and Chenier, and I appreciate the regional perspective that Chair Cabaldon has outlined. I want to just add from the perspective of a jurisdiction that has very low population, and that categorizes us as a small jurisdiction in this conversation. Our Public Works Director came and shared with me and others in our board and leadership team at Yolo County this proposal, and he was very excited because it looked like we might get 2 or 3 percentage points more in funding on this formula than we have historically received in an overall average basis over a period of years. And looking at it, I can see why he would be excited about that, because he could then address the basic needs that he sees in his role. The problem for us is that guaranteed minimum is also a guaranteed maximum. And if there are important projects that we have, which we have one that's very important, that's a completion of a Road 98, that's multiple year project, we would never be able to address that. I think, Christopher, your description of Winters as a jurisdiction that would have that sort of experience is accurate. And while we might get a few dollars, that's all we would get, and there would be no way for us to address a project that is larger than our minimum formula would achieve, and it would damage the ability of our partner agencies to address important needs that would benefit both their residents as well as the region. So I do think that this is a good conversation, and I appreciate the ideas of streamlining the application process, reducing the cost for application preparation. We have done that over the years. We provided technical assistance as a body to one another and to small jurisdictions. We've benefited from that, and I do believe that over time, in the current structure that we've been working with, we've had some reliability on multiple year funding for projects that can't get done in a single year. And by the process that we've been using now, we've been able to deliver more projects because you can't spend all the money in 1 year for some of these projects. And so some other jurisdiction might be able to move forward. I like the idea of some kind of a placeholder or commitment, a placeholder mostly for multiple year projects. But I do think we've got to hang together on this. And if we were to divide it up in this formulaic way, I'm afraid that over a few years, we would be very unhappy because we would have got what we asked for, and it would not be something that we would be happy with.
Thank you, Director.
That's it.
Thank you, Director Saylor. Are any members of the committee that haven't yet spoken on the item want to be recognized? Director Sander.
Thank you. I'll try to be brief. I think often we are poor evaluators of risk. You can certainly see that in this viral crisis that we're in. We're just not good at judging it, but I think we've got some staff here who might be able to give us some framework on it. I certainly see the allure in the short term of having guaranteed dollars coming to my community to deal with stuff that we decide on, not some other committee decides on, whether we qualify or not. But I'm wondering, over a period of time, what exactly do we put at risk? We've heard about our ability to sort of punch above our weight as SACOG and the state and bring in dollars, in part because we're scoring so many of the projects that we're awarding and awarding them based on merit, like trying to get to that impossible greenhouse gas goal of 19%. But I'm wondering from a staff perspective, is there any way to quantify the risk we would be taking or what we'd be putting at risk if we changed our strategy from competition to just pure formula?
It's the type of, Director Sanders, it's the type of question that we'd be happy to, as part of its scenarios for June and options that would be put forward, kind of, at least from a staff perspective, evaluate some of it and offer a perspective. I mean, clearly one of the things we want to protect are those 4 principles of what has made the regional funding successful in the past. Specifically, in that staff report we talk about, we do have a good reputation with the state. That's part of the reason we had such success with the competitive funding through the SB1 competitive grant cycle in 2018. And we do think that's important to protect. In addition to the successes we've had on grant applications, we want to make sure whatever options come forward, we also are showing to be a good steward of trying our best to move towards that ambitious greenhouse gas target. It's essential if we're going to get any appropriation from the state through the Green Means Go program. It's essential if we're going to get their support and leverage some of their dollars for other things we're trying to do as well. So we want to make sure that we stay competitive for state and federal funding. We've got a good track record to protect. Doesn't mean we can't have options that look at a hybrid, where sometimes local priorities are, there is some way to have guaranteed funding with policy commitments if the board wants, but we do know that there's a really important value to this point about there are sometimes big regional investments that are needed, both to make sure we're meeting our performance goals in the MTP SCS and also to demonstrate that we're following how state and federal funds are increasingly competitive and that we're doing our best to make sure that we're making strategic investments that have performance outcomes. And so those are things those are guardrails or policy objectives we want to protect on the regional side, but we do believe we could explore some scenarios for you and your colleagues on the committee to consider in June that give you an assessment of risk, what we think in terms of protecting those 4 outcomes, as well as what are perhaps implementation options that do also address some of the interests of locals for certainty, for streamlining, for finding ways to make sure that their local priorities are clearly reflected as well.
All right, so thank you, and thanks, Director Sander. We're going to turn to Director Slowy, who initiated this in the board for the last board. In just a second, it sounds like we're not at the point of a universal consensus on all the components, and also that it isn't necessary that we reach that, and that wasn't the plan for today. But the conversation has begun. The work on this and some of the indicators that are out there, and I appreciate Director Sanders' focus on some of the data and metrics. One other one I'd like to add to that pot is it was when we saw the theoretical runs about what formulas what might do, maybe the same ones that Director Saylor was mentioning that his Public Works Director showed. It appeared as though the allocations that go to transit agencies and to projects that are managed by Caltrans rather than by jurisdiction were not included. And that obviously those are not trivial parts of our overall regional funding. And so I'd be interested in seeing what as we look at the scenarios that Director Chenier's mentioned and others, that we get some clarity around what we're really talking about in terms of funding and whether Winters gets $7 or 18. So Director Slowey for the last word.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I'm glad we're having this conversation. Yeah, I wasn't around back in 2002 when Bill Hughes proposed it, but that was 17 years ago. So I get that. Well, actually 18 years ago, sorry. I should be better at my math. I'm glad we're having the conversation. At the same time, when we talked about scenarios, two things I want to mention. This isn't 100%, 0%. The proposal was 75-25, so there is still money every year out there for regional projects, because there have to be. I mean, there have to be ways for us to discuss projects that cross, jurisdictional boundaries and how we're going to fund those. And I would hope when you talk about the scenarios, I would also be willing to entertain different splits. Is it 60-40, 50? Again, I'm just don't know, but I don't want that to be taken off the table. And I get where SACOG's coming from. I mean, yes, to some extent, and I would argue that probably overplaying that hand in terms of the money we've been awarded is based on, other projects that we've delivered. I mean, this also came about with Mike McKeever trying to justify SACOG's existence and, having more to do with all of the input. So I just hope that when we look at scenarios, we keep an open and honest mind. And I think it's a great conversation regardless of where it goes. I think we're all in this together. Certainly not, proposing that there's any less regionalism, because SACOG is probably one of the only boards out there that does show regionalism. So with that, I look forward to the ongoing discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Slowey. This is an information item only, teeing it up for future.
Hello.
Hello?
Yeah, Christopher, it's Susan Peters. I've been waiting. I don't know if you've seen that.
I'm just seeing it now. So go ahead.
Okay, yeah, thank you. A couple of things. One, I've had a 2 or 3 texts that says that this proposal is not online. So if somebody could check that out as we go forward and make sure it gets online, that would be helpful. Something that I want to say that Jeff said also is that the proposal states that we will work within the MTSCS and work with SACOG to make sure that they accomplish regional goals at the same time, being our own priorities. And it is a 75-25 proposal to allow jurisdictions to compete and get more money for projects that cost above and beyond their fair share. So I welcome this discussion. Christopher, as you know, I've been wanting to have it for a number of years. And I also think that just because that's the way it has been for a long, long time doesn't mean that that's the way it has to be going forward. I think that we always need to justify our policies and have discussion around it. So I would ask that if staff is going to produce some examples of funding going forward, that they work with DOT staff, directors that they can choose among themselves, so that we're all on the same page. I think that might be helpful for people to see, and that's what I want to say. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Chair, just to respond to
so Matt, we're gonna because of the time, we're gonna need to move on. I do want to ask, if you're working with at least in my city, please do not. We have a great public works and transportation team. but that is not where the conversation begins and ends, and they haven't signed on to the paper. And so certainly welcome all the public works directors' input, but they are not necessarily the representatives of the jurisdictions we are. So, but please continue with the collaboration.
I understand that. I understand that, but they also know the numbers better than we do. I recognize we make the policy, but I just want to make sure that the proposal as it's laid out is then expressed in a way that both sides agree with what it says.
Yeah, well, I'm as a director wanting it to come back based on what the directors would like and what the staff's best recommendation is. I'm not comfortable directing them to come back with something that is a negotiated settlement with a subset of public works directors. I think it's important that we continue that dialogue and try to work through some of the issues that have been raised and try to address some of the opportunities that members of the committee and others and those public works directors have recognized. But I think we should be careful not to set a standard that we're expecting that staff has to reach an agreement with this.
That isn't what I said.
Okay, all right, and Jessica is reminding us that the document is available as handout number 1 on the website under the Transportation Committee agenda item that we've been taking up. So it is fully available to the public.
Great, thank you.
Okay, all right, so that we'll return to that at a future meeting. So we have just item 6 left, but I'm also getting notes from folks that may mean that we're going to lose a quorum of the committee since it is now noon. This is a significant item, so I'm curious to staff on telework, the time constraints on this issue and whether we could take this up at our next meeting or whether you see it, whether it's more of an emergency item.
Mr. Chair, it's not an emergency item. We can certainly push either the info item to the board. This was presented to PI on Monday. It is not scheduled with the Land Use and Natural Resources, PI, Policy and Innovation on Monday. It is not scheduled to be presented to Land Use and Natural Resources. There are no actions tied to this information, but it is a significant change in our programming that I would like to brief the board at some time.
All right, well, if you don't, perhaps if it's all right with the committee, I will confer with the chair and the vice chair of the board and the CEO as to whether or not it's appropriate to bring this back to committee at our next meeting or whether directly to the full board. So that's out of our pay grade, but I'll raise it with Mr. Ferrix and Mr. Samayoa, since we are about to lose a quorum, it appears. So, all right, thanks, Monica. So, Mr. CEO, any other business to come before the committee?
No, I think you've covered it.
We've had a rich meeting today. All right, then, is there a motion to adjourn?
Stop it.
Okay, that's a motion by Director Saylor. Is there seconds?
Second.
Seconded by Director Suen. Director Suen, Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll on the motion to adjourn?
Director Harris?
Yes.
Director Joyner?
Yes.
Director Peters?
She's no longer on the screen.
Aye.
That was Director Samayoa. Director Saylor?
Aye.
Director Chenier?
Yeah, delete.
All right, he's absent. Director Slowey?
Please.
Director Veerkamp? Absent. Director Jennings?
I second the please the motion.
Vice Chair Soon?
Aye.
Chair Cabaldon?
Aye. All right. With that, the motion carries. Thank you all for a very deep,
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to raise a point of order. Do we have a quorum to adjourn this meeting? I don't know if we don't, do we have to stay on the line?
Just the chair does.
I'm sorry, Director Saylor, you're breaking up. I can't hear you, but it's okay because the meeting is now adjourned. Thank you all.